Today, I want to talk about Farabi's view on the future contingent propositions and God's knowledge of them. To start, I should explain what I mean exactly by future contingent propositions. By future contingent propositions, we mean statements about future states of affairs, like events, actions, and everything that will happen in the future, and it's not necessary. So we are talking about the states of affairs that are neither necessarily true nor necessarily false. A statement about things that may or may not happen. To give two examples of such propositions or such statements, we can have the first proposition, which is a famous example by Aristotle. There will be a sea battle tomorrow. This is a proposition which may or may not be true. And the second proposition is by Farabi. Zaid will make a trip tomorrow. This proposition is again something that may or may not be true. So basically, future contingent propositions are propositions or statements about future state of affairs that are not neither necessarily true nor necessarily false. So it's possible that they are true and it's possible that they are false. So having this definition of future contingent propositions in mind, we can define these two doctrines. The first one is logical fatalism. According to logical fatalism, the fact that future contingent propositions has already a truth value contradicts with those propositions being really contingent. For example, if we suppose that proposition P is a future contingent proposition, then the fact that P has now a truth value contradicts that P is a future contingent proposition. For example, if we consider the proposition that that S will do A, when, for example, S is a subject and A is a specific action, then when we say that S will do A, if this proposition has no truth value, for example, it is true or false, then S is not free in doing A. Why? Because, for example, if you say that Saleh will do a specific action tomorrow, and you say that this proposition is now true, then suppose that now we are on Friday, and then I want to decide to do something else, to refrain from doing action A. But if I have this possibility, then it means that I have changed the truth value of this proposition, which is something that was fixed in the past. So I couldn't do that. Therefore, it seems that we have some sort of tension here. And a similar tension we have between the between God's knowledge of future contingent propositions, that the fact that they are expressing contingent facts. For example, we can formulate theological fatalism as stating that the claim that God knows P when P is a future contingent proposition contradicts that P is a future contingent proposition. As a result, that God knows S will do A contradicts that S is free in doing A. This is the well-known puzzle that we all know about, and the puzzle is about the conflict, the apparent conflict between God's knowledge of our future actions and our being free in doing those actions. It's well known that Aristotle has discussed logical fatalism in his book on interpretation. And in his commentary on this book, Farabi has discussed both logical and theological fatalism. And today I want to have a look at Farabi's interpretation of Aristotle's text and his own solution for this problem. So far it must be clear that the difference between logical fatalism and theological fatalism is that according to logical fatalism, the mere fact that a future contingent proposition has already a truth value, for example, it is true or it is false, make it impossible to be contingent. In the second case, I mean, in the case of theological fatalism, it's not the mere fact that that proposition is true or false. Rather, it is God's knowledge of that proposition, God's knowledge that something happens, something will happen or something won't happen, is the factor which makes the future contingent propositions basically impossible. And we all know that many people, for example, in contemporary philosophy of religion, many people reject logical fatalism, but they endorse theological fatalism. For example, they say that we have kind of, real conflict, real tension or incompatibility between God's knowing future contingent propositions and, for example, having real future contingencies. But they don't see any tension between the fact that future contingent propositions have truth values, and on the other hand, they are really contingent. They are not necessary. But in the traditional context, I mean, in Greek philosophy, it was first the problem of logical fatalism that was discussed, and then, as we shortly see in Farabi's commentary on Aristotle, we can see the discussion of theological fatalism as well. To say a few words about the Aristotelian background, suppose that P is a future contingent proposition and not P, which I symbolize with this, is the negation of P. Aristotle argues that first he shows that it is impossible that both P and not P are true. Otherwise, the principle of non-contradiction would be violated. So it's impossible that both P and not P are true. It's impossible that, for example, S will do A and S won't do A at the same time. And on the other hand, the second option is that the second thing for which Aristotle argues, it is impossible that both P and not P are false. Otherwise, again, the principle of non-contradiction would be violated. And at the end, it is also it seems also impossible that one of P and the negation of P is true and the other is false. Because otherwise no future thing can happen by chance and no future human action is free. Basically, again, suppose that something is now true. For example, the fact that Saleh will do a specific action tomorrow is now true. And if we suppose that it is now true, when it comes to tomorrow and I want to decide whether or not I want to do this specific action, I cannot refrain from doing that, because yesterday it was true that I am going to do this. It was actually true that I will do this specific action. And if I refrain from doing that, it means that yesterday it would have been false. It couldn't be basically true that I will do this specific action. So it seems that we have a puzzle here. On the one hand, it seems to be impossible that proposition and its negation can both have the same truth value, can both be true or can both be false. On the other hand, it seems that if we say that it has a determinate truth value, it is either true or false, then we have a conflict with that proposition being really contingent. So how we can solve this puzzle? Traditionally, there are two understandings of Aristotle's response to the problem of C-battle argument or the problem of logical fatalism. According to one interpretation or one reading or one understanding of Aristotle, which I call it interpretation A, Aristotle rejects the general applicability of the principle of bivalence and concedes that future contingent propositions have no truth value. Basically, according to this interpretation, Aristotle believes that no future contingent proposition has any truth value in advance. For example, if you say that Saleh will do a specific action tomorrow, and ask whether or not this proposition is true, I would say it's neither true nor false. It has no determined truth value. It is not really clear yet that this proposition is true or false. So according to the first interpretation, all future contingent propositions are basically truth valueless. They don't have any truth value. But according to a second interpretation, Aristotle's position is a bit more complicated. According to this interpretation, Aristotle rejects three, which was this view that I mentioned here. Basically, Aristotle accepts that that future contingent propositions can, in principle, have truth values. And he accepts that the truth value of future contingent propositions are already distributed. But on the other hand, he believes that such a distribution is indefinite. It's not something definite. Basically, he believes that they have a truth value, but it's not determined. It is not fixed. But still, you know, to be fair, it's very difficult to understand what exactly this position means. But in what follows, I try to elaborate to some extent, at least what this can in principle mean. So basically, according to the second interpretation, the future contingent proposition is now true or false, but this fact that a future contingent proposition is now true or false does not make it necessarily true or necessarily false. So we have these two rival interpretations. According to the first one, all future contingent propositions have no truth value. According to the second one, they have a truth value, but their truth value is not definite, it's indefinite. So now, according to Farabi, because Farabi in his book, he tries to comment on Aristotle's view, and then basically he presents himself as agreeing about everything with Aristotle. But this does not mean necessarily that what Aristotle, what we understand from Aristotle is the same thing that is the same thing as what we understand from Farabi. But traditionally, those people who worked on Farabi's response to the C-battle argument or his understanding of the C-battle argument, they have different understanding. They have different interpretations of Al-Farabi's text. For example, Nicholas Rescher, he believes that Farabi endorses the second interpretation, according to which future contingent propositions have truth value, but their truth value is indefinite. And basically, Rescher says that Farabi himself was the inventor of this interpretation or this solution to the problem. The second reading of, according to the second reading of Farabi, which is put forward by scholars like Zimmerman or Richard Gaskin, Farabi follows the ancient commentators and endorses the first option, according to which the future contingent propositions have no truth value. And the third interpretation is by Peter Adamson, which is more sophisticated and a bit more complicated. He believes that in his initial discussion of Aristotle's text of logical fatalism, Farabi endorses the first position. But later in his discussion of theological fatalism, he proposes the second solution, or the second way out, and applies it not only to theological fatalism, but also to logical fatalism. And in any case, neither it's likely that he is the inventor of this solution, nor he himself is satisfied with it. My own view is something in between. On the one hand, I believe that Farabi proposes the second interpretation, according to which, again, future contingent proposition have truth value, but their truth value is not definite. But on the other hand, I believe that Farabi proposes this solution not only in his discussion of theological fatalism, but also in the beginning of his discussion of logical fatalism. And but at the same time, I agree with Peter Adamson that it's unlikely that he is the inventor of the solution, and he himself is not satisfied with this solution. And this is something important that I will talk about. Farabi is not himself satisfied with the solution he proposes. Two initial observations about Farabi's approach. The first observation that we have about Farabi's approach is that Farabi doesn't show any doubt about our being free. He explicitly mentions several times in different parts of his book that it's undeniable that we are free. It's undeniable that there are contingencies about futures, and it's undeniable that our nature is basically free, and there are things that are left to our choice and view. But at the same time, there are places that we are not really sure if Farabi really believes that God has actually foreknowledge of our future actions or of future contingencies in general. For example, he never says that the rejection of God's foreknowledge is false or theoretically unjustified or philosophically impossible or something like that. He says that it is repugnant and very harmful for people to believe this proposition. The rejection of God's knowledge is repugnant and unacceptable. All religions have it differently, and it would seem very detrimental belief for people to hold. But at the same time, he also says that if we accept that God has foreknowledge, then something like a theological fatalism would follow. And on the other hand, he says explicitly that theological fatalism is repugnant too and rejected by all religions. This is Farabi's understanding. and very, very detrimental for people to believe. So basically, it seems that he is very determined, and he is so sure about us having free will. But on the other hand, his position about God's having foreknowledge is not really crystal clear. He says that it's unacceptable from the point of view of religions that God doesn't have foreknowledge. But on the other hand, theological fatalism is also unacceptable. So we should find a solution. But at the end, for some reasons that I will explain, I think he's not really satisfied with this solution. These observations, together with some doubts that he raises at the end of his discussion about the solution he himself proposes for theological fatalism, and also the fact that he considers free will and future contingencies as self-evident facts, might show that he is willing to endorse open theism. Basically, so if we read Farabi's text carefully, we can detect some sign of the view that is known in contemporary philosophy of religion as open theism. According to open theism, God basically doesn't have any knowledge of future contingencies. But at the same time, this doesn't mean that God has some sort of imperfection. Why? Because basically, knowing the future is impossible, and doing something impossible is impossible. And if someone cannot do something impossible, then it doesn't count as an imperfection for that agent. For example, God cannot make any round square, but at the same time, God's inability to make round square doesn't count as an imperfection for God, because making a round square is logically impossible, and not being able to do something that is logically impossible is not an imperfection for an agent. And so there are signs that it seems that Farabi is, has some sort of inclination toward open theism, the view that is later accepted by thinkers like, for example, Abul Barakat al-Baghdadi, who explicitly and openly endorses this view about God's knowledge of future contingencies. But first, we should know what's Farabi's treatment of these puzzles that we have is. So to start, I just consider Farabi's treatment of logical fatalism. In his explanation of logical fatalism, Aristotle says that for in saying that the existence of everything existing is of necessity when it exists, we do not assert that its existence is of necessity without qualification. Similarly, also with what does not exist. Here, basically, is the beginning of Aristotle's solution for the logical fatalism. He says that, okay, in a sense, if something is true, then in a sense, it is necessary. But on the other hand, it seems that things can be necessary in different ways. Farabi's reading of this passage is that Aristotle divides necessary existence into two kinds, of which one is necessary as long as it lasts, modal mawjuda, the other necessary without qualification, ala al-itlaq. So basically, this is the beginning of the solution that we have for logical fatalism, and the same thing that will be applied to the problem of theological fatalism. he considers two kind of necessary. One of them is intrinsically necessary or zaruri fi nafseh, or extrinsically necessary or extrinsically necessitated, which is when something is necessary, but it's not because of its own nature that it is necessary. It's because of being necessitated by something else externally. And it seems that here Farabi attributes this distinction to Aristotle. Of course, this distinction is not very explicit in Aristotle, but this is Farabi's understanding of Aristotle. And for people who are familiar with Avicenna's metaphysics, this is, I think, an initial version of what we have in Avicenna's metaphysics, necessary in itself and necessary through something else. And so we have this distinction in Farabi. To distinguish these two notions of necessity in a formal language, I use these two boxes. The white box for being necessary in itself or intrinsically necessary, and black box for extrinsically necessary or externally necessitated by something external. So this proposition can be read as it is intrinsically necessary that X exists. And and this proposition can be read as it is extrinsically necessary that X exists. So following Aristotle, Farabi seems to accept 3, but not 4. He says that if something exists, then it is extrinsically necessary that that thing exists. But if something exists, it doesn't mean that it is intrinsically necessary that it exists. For example, you know, if something exists, then the existence of that thing is, of course, caused by something else. Therefore, the existence of that thing is necessary in the sense that it is extrinsically necessitated by something else. So the third principle is true. Basically, the third principle is or can be understood as an interpretation of the principle of the sufficient reason. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that if something is necessary, that thing in itself is necessary, in the sense that it cannot not exist, in the sense that in any way it necessarily exists. So using this distinction, now we can address Farabi's solution to theological fatalism and logical fatalism, both of them together. So I first just read these passages, and then I try to formalize Farabi's solution, because I think the core of his solution will better be understood if we put it in a formal language. Farabi's solution is that God's knowledge of a future contingent proposition extrinsically necessitates it, but does not make it intrinsically necessary, because if something follows of necessity from something else, this does not mean that it is necessary in itself. So basically, he accepts that God's knowledge entail the truth of that proposition, and there is some sort of necessary connection between these two things. But he says that the connection between these two things is necessary, but it doesn't mean that the consequent itself is necessary in itself, or it is intrinsically necessary. For it is true to affirm something, it follows of necessity that for if it is true to affirm something, it follows of necessity that it is the case. Yet it does not follow that its being the case is intrinsically necessary. And then he continues by putting forward the famous example of Zaid going to a journey, and he says that if it is true for us to state that Zaid will set out on a journey tomorrow, it follows of necessity from the truth of our statement that Zaid will set out on a journey tomorrow. But this is not to deny that the traveling down by Zaid intrinsically results from Zaid's free will and from the fact that it is impossible that something done by Zaid should be intrinsically necessary, or that his power to refrain from traveling should be eliminated. So basically he says that, okay, if it is true that Zaid will go to a travel tomorrow, then there is some sort of necessary connection between the truth of this proposition today and Zaid's action tomorrow. But it doesn't make Zaid's action intrinsically necessary. And finally, he says that if God Most High knows in advance that Zaid will act in a certain way, God's knowledge that he will so act does not put an end to his power of refraining from acting. So it follows of necessity that he will do what God Most High knew that he would do, and that he will inevitably do it. But this necessity exists only in as much as Zaid's acting follows from the knowledge of God, which does not mean that Zaid's action assumes a necessary nature through its relation to what it follows from. Again, he repeats the same thing that I said previously, but this position can be formalized, and then if we formalize this solution, then it will be better understood, at least for people who are a bit familiar with contemporary logic or contemporary modal logic in particular. Consider that the proposition that S will do A tomorrow is represented by P. And then T and P represent that P, that proposition, is now true. It's true now that P is the case. And then the proposition that God now knows P can be symbolized by this. God knows that P is the case. So, and the proposition that S is not free in doing A can be represented by the white box of P, which means that P is intrinsically necessary. So basically, Farabi says that if P is intrinsically necessary, it means that it is intrinsically necessary that S will do A. And when it is intrinsically necessary that S will do A, it means that S is not free in doing A. Now we can basically formalize the solution that is proposed by Farabi for logical fatalism. He says that suppose that it is now true that P is the case. It is, for example, now true that S will do A. And he accepts that it is intrinsically the case that if P is now true, then P will happen. Then S will do A tomorrow. And he also accepts that from the fact that there is a necessary connection between the truth of P and the fact that now P is true and the fact that P will happen tomorrow. And from this, we can conclude that tomorrow P will happen in a necessary sense, but this sense of necessity is not intrinsic. It is only extrinsic to P. What he rejects is basically that we cannot conclude from all of these things, from the fact that it's necessary that truth of P entails P, and truth of P, we cannot conclude from this antecedent the consequence that P is intrinsically necessary. So we have no reason to think that P is intrinsically necessary, and we have no reason to think that S is not free in doing A. And following a similar line of argument, he proposes this solution for the theological fatalism. He basically says that suppose that God knows P. We accept that there is a kind of necessary connection between God's knowledge of P and P. If God knows that P happened, of course P would happen. But and it is of course true that we have some sort of necessity necessity for the occurrence of P, but this necessity is not intrinsic necessity. It doesn't mean that by nature P is necessary. So basically, we cannot conclude that P is intrinsically necessary, and we have no reason to think that S is not free in doing A. So these are Farabi solutions for logical and theological fatalism. Of course, some objections can be put forward, to this solution. The first is that if you think that these two objections that I want to discuss, because I know that some of you might be not really familiar with contemporary modal logic, so you can just ignore these two final objections because they are not that important, and so you can just forget about these two final objections. But for those people who are familiar with contemporary modal logic, if we accept K principle basically says that if we have a necessary connection between two propositions, and then the antecedent is also necessary, then the consequent must be necessary as well. So if we accept this principle, which was probably the oldest principle that we have in modal logic, and then it is also attributed, according to some interpretations, to Aristotle himself. So one might say that, okay, if we accept that there is a necessary connection between two propositions, and if we also accept that the antecedent is necessary, then we should accept that the consequent is necessary as well. A reply on behalf of Farabi is that, which is which is not something that I impose to him. It's something that can actually be extracted from Farabi's text. He says that we have no justification for the necessity of God's knowledge of a future contingent proposition. Basically, we have this proposition, but we don't have this one. We cannot say that the antecedent of this proposition is necessary. And because we don't have this necessity, we cannot conclude that the consequent is intrinsically necessary. Of course, because of a principle that I explained earlier here, this third principle, if something is true, then the intrinsic necessity of that proposition is established. So we can say that if God knows future, then it is extrinsically necessary that God knows the future. But this does not imply that it is intrinsically necessary that God knows P. So again, we cannot have this proposition here, and because of this, we cannot conclude the necessity of P in an intrinsic sense. And the final objection is that why? Because here, if you remember, I said that intrinsic necessity is identical to S as not being free in doing A. So one might say that why we have chosen to say that intrinsic necessity is identical to not being free? Why we cannot just simply say that even extrinsic necessity is equal to our not being free? The reply to this objection, of course, it's a weak reply, but the weak reply is that it's begging the question of fatalism. Because if we say that even extrinsic necessity is identical to the rejection of all contingencies, then from the outset we have accepted fatalism. And so if we want really to consider to be neutral with the question of fatalism, we cannot accept from the outset that having some sort of extrinsic necessity is identical to not being free or not having any contingencies. At least if we want to endorse this equivalence, we should have a positive argument for it. We cannot just simply assume this from the outset. And of course, I accept that this objection is weak, and this is probably why Farabi himself, at the concluding part of his argument, shows some sort of doubt again about his solution and whether or not this is acceptable. At the end of his discussion, although he has discussed all of these solutions for logical and theological fatalism, but he says that from a religious point of view, this opinion, compatibilism between God's knowledge and the existence of future contingencies, is more helpful than that of its opponent. The view of other people who reject this. Again, he doesn't say that this is the true view. He is something that is philosophically established. He says that this view is more helpful. It's more, it's enough for people to have this view. He doesn't say that we have philosophically proven or established that this view is true. Basically, he discusses two possible views. He says that there are people who says that modalities must be understood in a temporal sense. Therefore, if something is necessary, it means that it is always the case that that thing exists. And if something never happens, it means that it is impossible. But he says that there are some people who says that it is in principle possible that we have something that is possible, but it never exists. So, for example, something like a being, an animal, a human being, or any other existing thing, which can in principle exist, but it didn't exist so far, and it won't exist in the future, and it doesn't exist now. So there are people who say that even we have kind of temporal impossibility in a temporal sense, it is still possible to say that in a deeper sense of possibility, it can be still possible. And he says that we should accept this view, and this allows us to reconcile God's knowledge of future contingencies with there being really contingent and not necessary. But at the end, he says that this is the more helpful view. He doesn't say that this is the true view. He doesn't say that this is the convincing view. So far, to conclude, it seems that Farabi has really interesting solution for logical fatalism and theological fatalism that can be formalized in the language of contemporary modal logic. And the strength of his view in a formal framework is completely proven. But at the same time, although we have this a strong solution, at least when it comes to formal, formal argument, he is not himself satisfied with this solution, and he shows his doubt in different places of his argument, and explicitly in the concluding remark of his discussion of logical and theological fatalism. And thank you so much for your attention.